Oh, she was a ghoul, so that's what happened. So I didn't get laid.
Hey everybody, it's Sozo, and it's nice to see you again. So, would you ever consider using your eyeballs as a shield? Well, this guy has. So, today's topic, were the eye shields good? And what were the drawbacks? The answer is no, the eye shields were quite ineffective and caused severe memory loss. But why is that exactly? Okay, let's be honest. The whole losing your memory thing in a show is like the biggest cliche and a lethal dose of trash writing for most TV series. It's just too convenient for the plot a lot of the time. So when I saw Kaneki get his eyes, stabbed inwards, my curiosity was piqued. And because I'm curious, today we will be looking at what happened to Kaneki's brain during the fight alongside the aftermath. The human brain can be divided into 4 different parts. That pink part, also known as the cerebrum. That thing that looks like a chewed up gum.
I chewed my gum so it looks like a brain. Blah.
These 4 parts are the frontal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, and parietal lobe. Let's assume this diagram is Kaneki's head. If he were stabbed through the head, different parts would be affected differently. Normally, the left and right side of the brain have different purposes even if it's the same lobe, but because Kaneki was injured in both eyes by the end, I'll say the entire lobe process was interrupted and not individual sides just to make things a little more simple. Alright, so we're going to begin in order of contact. Kaneki is first pierced from the back of the head all the way through to his left eye. The first part of the brain to be punctured is the occipital lobe is in charge of visual perception. This includes color, form, and motion. When injured, the occipital lobe can cause hallucinations, illusions, difficulty locating objects in an environment, and the inability to recognize the movement of an object. When it comes to Kaneki's case, the hallucinations and illusions do come in later on in the fight. We can see this when he starts seeing his younger self along with his mother. Now, this is obviously some creative liberties from the author, but for the sake of the analysis, I'll assume Kaneki was truly seeing these things. This would be heavy hallucinations considering Kaneki is perceiving a completely different environment and not just an altered version of the real environment that he's currently in. Alright, so in chapter 139 we can see he's probably having some trouble locating Arima due to the damage to the occipital lobe, but because these are just panels, I'm not sure how accurate or close Kaneki is with his attacks. But when Kaneki sends out an attack with his Kagune, it is a little sporadic and all over the place. We can combine this with the assumption that Kaneki is also having difficulty recognizing Arima's movements around the fight. But all of this is nearing the end of the fight when he has already been pierced at least once. And in any case, you probably need a lot of shrooms to get to the level of hallucination that he's at. The temporal lobes are responsible for auditory information and encoding memories. That's why they're a little closer to the sides of your ears. The dominant temporal lobe, which is the left side in most people, is involved in understanding language and learning and remembering verbal information. When injured, the temporal lobes can cause difficulty understanding spoken words, impair long-term memory, persistent talking, and, emotional disturbances. The takeaways for Kaneki here are 1. Persistent talking. As we can see in the panels, here he's just repeating himself over and over and over. Number 2 would be emotional disturbances, and in this occasion, anger, and we can see that this actually still remains within Haise once he becomes Haise anyway. And number 3, long-term memory loss. By the end of the fight, we see Kaneki agreeing to rest a bit, and I'll show up that panel on the screen here. So our boy Kaneki's going through more memory loss than high school students when you fucking asked him for last night's goddamn homework! The frontal lobe of the brain is the largest lobe of the brain and just right behind the forehead, so you can imagine that this is most likely the problem during head injuries. The frontal lobes are considered our behavior and emotional control center and home to our personality. In Kaneki's case though, we can assume that by the effects of the damage, the frontal lobe was not hit too severely. And if you look at the brain map again, notice that because the frontal lobe is behind the forehead, Arima's lance most likely just tore the underside of the frontal lobe or pushed it upwards. Either way, even to a normal human, there's a pretty decent chance of surviving this. And someone already has, and his name is Phineas Gage. Without all the story details, Phineas survived a 6-foot pole blowing through the front of his head due to an accidental dynamite explosion. Not only did he survive, he actually came out looking pretty alright. The one tiny problem was that according to his friends and acquaintances, Phineas changed in personality very obviously and was extremely prone to aggression. Does that sound familiar? Well, I hope it does, or you just haven't been paying attention to anything I've been saying. Pay some fucking attention! So, it is apparent that this is an underlying effect in Kaneki throughout the Re series, when he identifies as Haise Sasaki. Not only does the audience get to witness bouts of anger when Haise loses control, but it's apparent that his personality is ever so slightly different from Kaneki. It is a subtle difference, but one nonetheless. So, real quick, do you think Kaneki could pass off as having a mental disorder on TikTok, or does it have to be fake? Oh my god. Alright, so let's summarize everything and bring everything to a nice little conclusive end, with a little bow on top. In the beginning of Tokyo Ghoul Re, the audience is surprised to see that Kaneki is no longer Kaneki and instead goes by Haise. The reason for all the changes are as follows. Damage to the occipital lobe caused Kaneki to hallucinate during his fight with Arima, and possibly left permanent damage to Haise, as Haise also hallucinates throughout the series. Damage to the temporal lobes caused long-term memory loss, and we can see this obviously because Haise does not remember his life as Kaneki. Even though he gets little glimpses here and there, he's trying to remember who he was when he finds out about the eye patch ghoul. Damage to the frontal lobe caused changes to his personality and behaviors, and therefore giving us the character known as Haise Sasaki. Putting all of this together, I hope now you can see how Haise Sasaki came into the series in a manner that makes sense, you know? Although, why the fuck did his ghoul regeneration not bring back his memories faster?